might be here, as Joe said, because we are starting these welcome circles and we're getting those going right now. But you're also maybe here just because you want to know more about ethical direct service and what that looks like, and might be curious to see how this relates to your larger work. So tonight is going to be a little bit universal, but also focused on working with Afghan families, because that is what is happening next for us. This might be a redundant training for you all. And if so, I'm really glad. I'm really, really, really glad if it's redundant. Let's hear these things like 100 times, normalize them, learn them, unlearn them, and get this really solid, because what we're trying to do in this training is change paradigms and change perspectives on working with direct service opportunities. So just as we're starting, can everyone type in the chat where in SoCal they are and what they're affiliated with, if anything, if you feel like it? And why do you welcome refugees? Just throw some out there in the chat. And as Joe mentioned, there's a lot of big questions that we all have right now about these welcome circles, what they're going to look like. We're going to get to those questions. And at the same time, today's talk is just about ethical direct service. We're really going to focus on what that looks like, trauma-informed practices, and working with communities. There are a lot of conversations that need to happen, and they will happen, but tonight is about ethical direct service. So we'll go through it. We have so many people from so many different places. I welcome refugees because of my own heritage, my family history, universal values. We have some welcome circle participants, nation of immigrants who enrich our communities. As Jews, we are commanded to welcome the stranger. This is wonderful. Keep sharing. So excited to have so many of you here. So as we are going through this, we've kind of come up with guiding principles, 5 of them, that we're going to be focusing on throughout. And I'm going to go through each of these principles, explain them. We'll do little scenarios. We'll get interactive, hopefully. And it might help if you have a piece of paper or something with you to write with, do some journaling, do some note taking, and do some reflection. So our guiding principles are honoring autonomy, demonstrating respect, language matters, practice humility and teamwork, and learn from reflection. That is what we are focusing on tonight and what we're going to go through together. Can someone read this for me? Is there someone who'd like to volunteer to read our intention setting and grounding as we begin? You can just unmute if you're up for it.
As we delve into the work of exploring, considering, and growing, let us begin by reflecting on the meaning behind our work. Let us ground ourselves in the awareness of our work as serving refugees and their communities as they see fit, walking alongside them and providing support that is trauma-informed, mindful, and considers the well-being of all who are involved. Let us step into the space of reimagining by re-envisioning what it means to walk hand in hand with the communities that we have the privilege of supporting. Let us reflect on what it means to be an accomplice, a co-conspirator. Let us imagine what it means to share power and space with those with lived experience, reflecting reflexively on how we can ensure that they are supported and that we are equipped to sustain our support of them.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think that's a lot of words, but it really grounds what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're working with communities hand in hand, and that is why we're here. So why? Why are we doing this? We just set our intentions, we're grounded, but how does this work serve us personally? How are we going to understand our vulnerabilities and how they play into ethical direct service? Because as we know, and as we're here tonight to discuss, well-meaning volunteers can unintentionally cause serious problems and even danger to families that we're working with. And so we want to make sure that the work that we're doing is coming from trained perspectives, is supporting communities, is working hand in hand with them, and is set up from the ground in a really solid way. If we have structures in place, if we have strategies that are prepared, we're going to be approaching this in a really different way than if we're coming into it without that perspective. So how do we identify our own triggers? How do we call that out within each other? And why are we doing this work? You all just talked about why we welcome refugees, but beyond why we're welcoming refugees, why do you care about getting involved in this work? What motivates you? Anything is valid, just something to reflect on, and we'll keep reflecting on it through the training. So this is about ethical direct service. And ethical direct service is successful based on relationships. Relationships start with listening. And our whole goal here is to model this to our community. People are going to observe how we're working with refugees, and it's going to shape it. It's going to change it. It's going to grow how everybody is doing this. We're going to make mistakes, and I make a lot of mistakes in this. I'm not perfect. I'm not an expert on this at all. But what I do know is that relationships are crucial to having successful outcomes. I've worked with a lot of different refugee families all over the world. I've worked with asylum seekers and immigrants and refugees in refugee camps around the world and here in Los Angeles. And from a social work background also, I know that the number one most important factor in a successful outcome for a family is the relationships that they build with others. And so that's where we're coming in here. We are partnering with families, we're working directly with people, and we have the opportunity to be that person, to build these relationships and to make that successful for them. Best practices are sometimes counterintuitive. So just something to keep in mind as we go through this. Relationships start with listening. That's what we're doing. We're listening, we're learning, and we're understanding that we might not know what we think is best. We might think what we know is best, and it might be not so helpful or harmful. So we are questioning ourselves. We're thinking inward. We are critically, reflexively thinking about what we are contributing, why we're here, and why we're coming together. Can you type in the chat for me some assumptions that you might hold about refugees and asylum seekers? Any assumption at all, just throw them out there. What do we think of when we think of refugees? Traumatized, vulnerable, sad, frightened. They've been through trauma to get here. Resilient. They don't speak English. Limited language skills, have endured physical or emotional trauma. We might assume they want to assimilate or assume they don't want to assimilate. Life in peril if they stay. These are great assumptions. And just want to say, assumptions are assumptions, right? We don't know. We have to ask. We have to assume nothing and understand that working from assumptions can cause harm. Because, I mean, if we think people from X country don't sleep in houses, they sleep outside, maybe that's not the case. If we think refugees are uneducated, maybe that's not the case. Maybe the refugees that we're working with were the former ambassador in their country and had to flee. We don't know why people are coming. We don't know what their background is. We know nothing. We're listening through the lens of open ears, and we will always have our assumptions and our biases. And that's why we're putting them out here now so that we can lay them on the ground and say, this is what we are assuming. This is what people assume. This is what my parents assume, my grandparents assume, this is what I assume, and this is how we're going to start and say, these can be challenged. We don't know. We have to ask or not know. We have to learn. We have to be curious. We have to be open. So our first guiding principle is honoring autonomy. When we honor autonomy, we're asking families what they need. We are not making assumptions. And that is critical here because family members can make their own decisions, kind of Wow, wow, wow. Families can make their own decisions. They don't need us to make those decisions. They need us to be a guide by the side, walking with them, not their magic fixer, not their person who's coming in and saying, yes, I know what you should do, because families know what they need. We can support them, we can be there with them, but they know what they need best. We are providing clear information, reliable resources, but we don't speak for families. We're not there to be their mouthpieces. They have mouths, they can speak, that's their job. But we are honoring their autonomy and supporting them with how they want to be supported, not with how we think that they should be supported. And on that same vein, honoring autonomy includes confidentiality. We're not sharing identifying information about families or addresses or photos of the family. We're remaining curious. We ask about what they need. We don't assume about needs, wants, preferences, etc. When we're thinking about the welcome circles in this, it's kind of complicated. It's something that I've talked with a lot of you about in the past. How do we furnish a house before we know who the family is? How do we, like, are we going to put plants and decoration on the walls? Are we going to have everything ready for them? We're going to ask them what they want. We're going to ask them what they're open for. We're not going to set things in place exactly ready for them. It's a two-way process, two-way street, and something that we're going to design hand in hand with a family rather than putting power over and saying, this is what I think you need. So our first case in practice for you all is about support versus doing for. And I know you all have your little paper and your writing tools ready. So I would like you to just reflect for a second on some examples in your life where you might practice allowing and supporting autonomy. Maybe that's with your adult children, your aging parents, with people you perceive to be struggling. Just kind of take some notes. You can share them in the chat if you'd like to. But think about those examples and times in your life where you're supporting versus doing for. And also note that support means different things to different people at different times. And in order to understand what support people need, we need to take the time to listen and check in and practice that power with people rather than imposing. How do we work with them to understand what their needs are rather than assume and decide for families? Our next case in practice and principle is demonstrating respect. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of information, so we're going to go through it kind of fast, but please come back and revisit these principles and journal and reflect, and there's going to be a lot more opportunities to do so. But demonstrating respect means respecting confidentiality and privacy. And that relates to digital images, that relates to addresses, that relates to a whole spectrum of issues. It also means respecting roles. Now, this is something that I think is so important that I've come across a lot of times when working with refugees. We need to allow parents to be parents and children to be children. And that means children are not working as translators for their parents. That is getting into parentification issues. It can be if a child can't have their childhood and is working as a translator for their parents, how is that impacting their child development and their life? Parents get to parent their own children. We're not parents for their children, and children get to be children. They don't need to be their parents, the equivalent of a parent in that role, or stepping into roles outside of that of a child. And that, again, we're not in charge of their life. It's their life. We are guiding from the side. Okay. We have a poll for you now. How exciting. Let's see. Sarah, I might need you. Oh, no, I think I can do it. Okay. Launch. Do you see the poll? Did it come through? Ah, that's exciting. We go to a park picnic with a family. What photo can we share afterwards on social media? Why?
Privacy
Privacy. Why else? That's a great answer.
and safety.
Safety. Yep.
Also, I don't know if
Boundaries.
this really counts. but
Boundaries.
We're not really posting to get attention, right? Like it's not, we don't need to be getting that sort of attention.
That absolutely counts. It's not really about us. It's not our story. We're guides on the side. We're helping. It's not our story.
Right.
We don't know safety ramifications, boundaries. Whoever said that, thank you. Rosa, did you have something?
I said boundaries.
Boundaries, thank you. Excellent job on the poll. Why wouldn't we post the other ones? Photo of the family and us smiling. Maybe if you're posting that, the family has consented to it and said, oh yeah, let's take this picture. Maybe the family wants to take the picture. But they don't maybe know, maybe, again, I'm assuming we can't make assumptions. We have to be aware of that. But maybe they don't know where it'll be shared. Maybe there's privacy concerns. Maybe there's safety concerns. Maybe they're targeted as asylum seekers here. We just don't know what it's going to be. A photo of the family's children, that one's a no, because children can't give consent. And even if parents are giving consent, we don't know kind of how the ramifications of consent go. We don't know if consent is being given freely. We have power over this family constantly, even if we're trying to have power with, because of our positionality in this work. We're coming as supporters, we're giving them resources. The power balance is always going to be off. And D, a photo with kids crying and looking distressed with our location tagged is absolutely a no, because we want to always be presenting people in the best light possible, and sharing location can be something of danger. Religious concerns, Bev, you brought that up too. What if the family asks for a photo? Yeah, they can absolutely ask for a photo and you can take them. I have a bunch of photos that I've taken with families in refugee camps. You just don't have to post them anywhere. But yeah, you can definitely. And if they ask you if you're okay with them posting it, if you are okay with that, then that's fine too. But again, it's family's prerogative. Can I close the poll? Yes. Okay. Oh, it keeps opening. Okay. Cultural humility. So does someone want to read this definition of cultural humility for me? Does it show up on your slide? Are we still?
Oh dear, I think that she stepped out for a second.
I got it. Might take a second. Okay, let's see if you can see this. Can you see it?
Yep.
Great. Who would like to read this? Unmute yourself.
Cultural humility is the ability to be open, self-reflective, and inquisitive when interacting with another person in regard to their culture, all the while challenging power imbalances that exist due to societal structures and history.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So this is saying the family knows best what they need. Mental health support might look different in our community, so we're not going to push what we think that they need. We're going to be open. We're going to understand that cultures are different. We're going to understand that there's lifelong learning that is fundamental to working in power with others. We don't know everything always. And we're always striving for a sense of cultural humility versus cultural competence. Cultural competence assumes that, like, check mark, we got it. We learned everything. We can cross it off. It's prescriptive. We're searching for cultural humility, addressing our own biases and assumptions. We're working in a multicultural space. There's going to be biases and assumptions that come up, as we just talked about. We're talking about resilience-focused work. We're talking about work that's focused on autonomy. We're talking about people-centered processes and lifelong learning. We're not going to know everything. It's not going to be perfect. We're not shooting for perfection. We're shooting for cultural humility, which is a process that we'll strive to arrive at without ever arriving, if that's clear. Constantly growing from it. Now, question for you all. Where is Afghanistan on a map? Can you name it? Can you find it?
Sure.
That's a great step in the right direction. That's something that is important. What are other things that you'd want to know about a place where you're working with people from? What assumptions do you have about people from Afghanistan? What assumptions do you have about Afghanistan as a country? What do you want to learn? What do you want to know? How is that going to contribute to your work with people? Why is this important? Do you know its capital city? Does that matter? Why does it matter? Just things to ponder.
I think you want to know some of the history and the background of people, where they're coming from.
Why?
Because it goes to make up their psychological makeup as to what they had to endure over the ages, whether it's 20 years, whether it's 40 years, whether it's 60 years. You know, they know their history, we don't.
And this is cross-cultural work, right? We're working with people who may be different than us, or may not, or may have a lot of similarities with our history. We're learning about the ways that humanity works and intersects. Language matters. The way we speak really, really, really matters. The way that we're interacting with people through our words shows respect, shows autonomy, adds understanding, all of this. And so we're gonna dive into that. This is two cultures meeting. That's a really, really big deal. And because of that, we need to be really intentional with our language, which means saying what we mean directly. Learning a little bit of whatever language they speak to show respect and to show that cultural humility and constant desire to learn, desire to know more, and show respect towards them. Like, you don't need to be fluent in a language, but learning like hello really goes a really, really, really long way. This might seem counterintuitive, it comes really natural when you're working with someone directly, but it isn't effective. Sometimes we just raise our voices and speak louder, thinking that that'll help them understand us, right? But what it'll actually help them understand us is if we're using whole language, not abbreviations, if we're checking for understanding, and it's simple and respectful, and we're speaking clearly. A couple other notes on language that I just think are very important here. We are supporting these families. We are not adopting them. They have a family of origin. We're welcoming this family with honor and respect, understanding expectations and trying to be critical about them, but we're not adopting them. They're also not our family. They're a family we're working with. They're a family we're supporting. We're working to avoid patronizing patriarchal language as much as possible. They are not our families. We are not adopting them. We are working hand in hand with this family. And another note, just putting it out there, we're working with Afghan communities, right? But Afghani is a currency, not the name of people. Afghans are people from Afghanistan. Just quick little note. I like that, Jess. 5-letter words. 5 words. Okay. I have a poll, I think. When I do it. Sarah, I might need, is Sarah there? Can you launch the poll? Okay, here's the scenario. Our family arrives to the airport. I'm so excited and I get to go pick them up. And I get there and I'm at LAX and I'm like, woo, this family is coming. And I get to bring them to their new house that we've set up. We're super excited. And then I get there and I realize that they speak Pashto and I only speak Dari. What should I do to make sure that they can understand me? Should I speak louder if they can't understand me? It's a big solid 100% no. Great job, everybody. We're not speaking louder, but we are speaking more clearly. We are enunciating our words. We are using Google Translator. We're using Google. There's other resources that we'll talk about more if you're working in the Welcome Circles. There's a great one called Tarjimly that I got to help do the launch for. I was their like test pilot when I worked with refugees in Greece. And it was a great app. We love Tarjimly.
Hi, honey.
And
Look at my drawing.
what?
Oh, sorry.
Oh. There's so many great translation services and we have translators. We're going to use them and we're going to not use children as translators. Great job, everybody. Okay, learning from reflection. Now, there's a lot going on, right, when we're working with a family. And all of us have different vulnerabilities and different backgrounds that we're bringing into this. Everybody's coming into it with a different perspective and a different lens. So I just want you to think for a second about what your emotional and psychological connection to this work is. Because we're all coming at this from different places, but we all carry that aspect. And we need to understand how our vulnerabilities play into this work. We need to understand when we can recognize them and address them, get support for them, and acknowledge it so it doesn't impact our relational work with these families. And again, when we're learning from reflection, what we're really doing is listening to the family and prioritizing their voices, prioritizing their experience, and trying to understand what they need. Because again, that's the whole thing here. When we're doing that, a good way to start is to notice your body, notice your physical reactions. We're all carrying trauma in different ways. We're often working with survivors. Some of us are survivors ourselves. And the way that we're working with people is impacted by the trauma that we've experienced. Secondary trauma and vicarious trauma are very real and can come about when doing this work. And so being cognizant of the ways that our own experience play into this work from the start, from before this work begins, is so critical. So when you're noticing your body and you're doing a little scan, do you feel triggered? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel tense, relaxed? And then what do you need in this moment? How can you get help? How can you identify it and then reach out for support? Talk to someone else in your welcome circle, talk to a counselor, talk to a therapist, talk to a friend, family member, something like that, and receive the support that you might need to understand both what's going on with you and the way it impacts your relationship with the family. And remember that this work is long-term. We're in it and we're in it day after day after day after day, and all of that can accumulate and become hard on the body at times. This work is a marathon and not a sprint. So coming up with techniques from the start that you might need to use or might want to use as you're doing this work can be really helpful. So kind of now take a moment and brainstorm on what you might need in doing this work. What would be helpful? What will be your resources? What will be your support? So you're going to be supporting families. You're going to be working with them, and they've been through a lot. It's going to be a lot for you, maybe, or maybe not. And so how are you going to keep yourself replenished and able to be supporting that? Next, we're going to talk about the undercurrent of trauma in this situation and how we can understand that. I'm going to start by saying that stories are owned by families. They're not for public consumption, and their trauma is not for our entertainment. We're working with people who have likely experienced trauma. Again, we're not assuming anything, but people are coming and they have likely experienced trauma. But that does not mean that it is our position to ask the family to share their story of trauma. We're not going to ask them about their trauma. That's not our job. We're not their therapists. We are not their social workers. They might volunteer to share that with you, but it is not their obligation, and it is not our need to hear it. They may or may not, when they're ready or wanting, or if they do feel comfortable with you. Sometimes when people feel comfortable, they might share that trauma story with you. And that is not a guarantee. And that's not something that is a mandate in it. It's completely up to them how they do it, if they do it, and what that looks like. Now, just so we're all on the same wavelength, does someone want to read this definition of trauma? I put 2.
Trauma is a single event, multiple events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically and emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Trauma can overwhelm the body's ability to cope.
Thank you. I think that last one is really good. Trauma can overwhelm the body's ability to cope. That looks really different in everyone, right? And there's no hierarchy of trauma. So people have experienced trauma and other people have experienced trauma. One person's trauma is not more important or more deserving of support than another person's trauma. Trauma is trauma. And just because someone's experienced trauma does not always mean that they're traumatized. There's different spectrums of this, and there's different ways that people will respond to traumatic experiences. Just because someone has gone through trauma does not mean that they have PTSD. Just because someone has gone through trauma does not mean that they're showing the signs of trauma that you might expect them to be showing. Trauma could show up in really different ways. We're going to touch now on the 6 principles of trauma-informed care and what that means. And before that, I just want to say our whole world is kind of in trauma right now, right? We're going through a global pandemic. We're going through a whole lot of things. We're all dealing with a traumatic global event. We're all navigating our own traumas right now. And again, just because one person's trauma is really horrific looking on the surface doesn't undermine another person's trauma or another person's experience. So all I'm saying is we're just going to be mindful about ourselves, about others, about people we're working with. That's what trauma-informed care is really about. It's about building safety, trustworthy and transparency, mutual help, collaboration, and peer support, mutuality, empowerment, voice, choice, and understanding the undercurrent of cultural, historical, and gender issues. Because we also need to recognize that the systems in the United States that these people are going through right now are also often very traumatizing. Again, not always, but they can be traumatizing or re-traumatizing. They're cutting off. Let me see. Let me stop sharing and see if it comes back. What about now? Is that better?
Now you're not sharing.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that does it. Thank you.
Great. We just restarted it. Turn it off and turn it back on. So we're being mindful, we're checking motivations, we're being aware, we're understanding how US systems can exacerbate trauma, right? And also, we also understand that some people can have experienced trauma and a lot of trauma and be traumatized and appear quite calm and in control and smiling and nodding and actually be completely on fire inside. So trauma shows up in people in different ways all of the time. So we can't make assumptions that someone is totally fine if they're smiling and nodding when that maybe isn't the case. And we're understanding how our trauma plays into all of this. This is a little image on how to support someone who's experienced trauma, all the different ways. You can look at this and I'll send the slides over afterwards too with the recording. But genuine relationships are really key here. And when we're working with people that we don't know, that are coming from different cultures, and we're working to build cross-cultural relationships with people, we understand, however, that the relationships that we're creating in these welcome circles and different partnerships and working with refugees and immigrants, they're intentional and they're purposeful and they're time-bound and they're for a purpose, right? With the welcome circles, we are working to support families because they are not working with a resettlement agency. They're working with us instead. So we have a list of things that we're supporting them with. We have processes. If someone who is getting those services from us is asked, for example, will you be my friend when this is over? The response would be like, oh, of course, maybe, or no, I don't want to be your friend, or maybe something in between. But the power balance is always going to be off because we are doing the giving. If I give my friend, if I give a stranger $500 and I'm saying, here's $500, and then we start hanging out, there's always that I gave them $500 in the mix. You can't take that part away and have everything start from a neutral playing field. So all of this is kind of done on a power balance tightrope that we're walking on that changes how we are interacting with people. And so from there, I want to talk a little bit about expectations and our own expectations, maybe families' expectations, and just say first, we're not owed anything for our work. And that's kind of hard to swallow. Maybe it feels uncomfortable, but we are not owed anything for doing this work. We're not owed their friendship. We're not owed their gratitude. We have to be okay with receiving nothing at the end of this and having our expectations not be met. So I'd actually like to hear from some of you about this. If at the part A, the 6 months ends, the family moves away, we're never in touch again. How will you feel in that case? You can either type in the chat, you can share out. What would that be like? Grateful, naturally curious as to how they are, sad, depends on the relationship, maybe disappointed. What about if the family is like constantly saying yes to everything? Or like, would you like a kugel? And they're like, yes, I'd like a kugel. Would you like me to take you to the post office tomorrow? Yes, I'd like you to come with me. Would you do this for me? Yes, I'll do it with you. All of this is happening. Constantly expressing gratitude, overwhelmingly thankful. They're saying, thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. You're a lifesaver, blessings, blah, 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 blah. Constantly in gratitude. What's that like?
Awkward.
Awkward. Uncomfortable. Question sincerity. Power imbalance. I'd be worried. Yeah, I'd be worried too. Maybe. And then this is coming from some real world experience from some of our people. You donate your mom's china set to a family, your mom's beloved china set. The family kind of is like underwhelmed, not overly grateful. It just kind of like, okay, cool. How do you respond? How do you feel in that circumstance? You're right, Deborah. The china set meant more to me than to them. My expectations were misplaced. What do I do with that? How do I sit with that? How do I understand how to process my emotions about that china set? It was actually okay. See, some people have different reactions. Maybe someone else is totally okay with that, and I'm really upset about it. It's all about understanding. Yeah, I think your mom would be happy they had it. It's not about me. I think these three statements, right? The family moves, we never see them again. Some people feel disappointed. Some people feel that sense of termination and closure, and the experience wrapped up. It's a time-bound process. It ends. We're not in touch. And some people don't. Some people would feel really sad that they don't continue a relationship. It's different for everyone. And I think what we're saying is neither of these are bad. None of the responses are bad. It's just something to be aware of, how you're responding, what your response is tied into, where it's coming from, and what you want to do with it. And if the family is constantly saying yes, 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 what do we do with that power imbalance? What do we do with that power over? How do we get to this power with? I think I brought this up earlier, but just in case I didn't, if you're with a family and they need to make a medical appointment and you are going to accompany them with it, who should be doing the scheduling of the appointment? Who should be on that phone call? Should it just be you? Should it be you and the family? Family and the translator if necessary. And that's the whole thing, is we're doing stuff with the family, with both. What about if the family needed to sign some paperwork? Are you signing for the family? No, heck no. Family is signing their own paperwork. These are all the boundaries that we're creating and the work that needs to be done, right? Understanding where our work ends, where the family is the family and is in charge of everything that they need to do, getting his support from us as needed. And then also how we can just be that general support, but from a boundary perspective. And then part C, you're donating your mom's china set to the family and the family's underwhelmed. Okay, they're underwhelmed. Okay, what do we do with that? How do you feel about it? How do you process it? Is it about you? Is it about them? Is it about the whole experience? Personally, maybe I would be pretty disappointed. I thought they'd love that china set. But it's maybe, who knows, right? It's all about the assumptions that we're coming in there with. Similarly, on this is an opportunity to shift the reputation and perception of Americans as the only ones, the only people who can save people. We're not gonna try not to take on that savior mentality. And I want to know, what does that look like? What does that mean? How can we call that out? How can we recognize it within ourselves? How can we see what we're doing and recognize that that's what maybe is happening or not? Just something to ponder. You don't need to write, something to journal. You can write if you want. we're working with families who've experienced things that we can't imagine, right? We're not living their experience. All we know is our own experience, our own reality. But everything that we bring to this work is in relation to ourselves, in relation to them. Brooke, I think that's a really, really important point. Why are these folks refugees? What role did the US have in making them refugees? What is our role in all of this? And Alexia, honest and kind accountability among group members and friendly feedback when necessary is exactly how we proceed. That's exactly our role when working together in all of this. Our whole job is to be coming together, sharing information, understanding our triggers, understanding where the power imbalances are, and doing what we can to be aware of them. We're not their therapists. We're not their social workers. We're not their best friends. We're not their blah, 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 blah. We are supporting these families. So that's the reality. That's what we're doing here. I think this quote really sums it up nicely. If someone wants to read it, I'd love that. Or we can read it silently to ourselves too.
I'll jump in. But why not? If an Italian psychologist, in this case me, can fly off to China to provide therapy, why not the other way around? The neo-colonial mentality is sometimes so ingrained in parts of the aid sector that we fail to notice our paternalism. We can help them, but it never occurs to us that they may be able to help us.
Thank you, Brooke. And thank you, Rosa. Maybe the thing to do is always to be conscious of how doing this work actually helps us and bring that up in our groups. It's a great point. We're not owed anything for doing this work. And we have to be okay with that. And that's hard. That's hard to sit with. So we have to understand why we're doing this work if we're not going to get something from it. And maybe we are getting something from it, but it's not from the family directly. We're not owed their gratitude. We have to be okay with receiving nothing, not having our expectations met. And we also need to understand that there's so much that these families are offering to us. And there's so much of this neo-colonial mentality that Alessandra Pini talks about here that's ingrained in this work. She says, if an Italian psychologist can fly to China to provide therapy, why can't it happen the other way around? If we're assuming that the people we're working with are uneducated, if we're assuming that they don't speak English, all of them, if we're assuming that they are not going to acculturate or assimilate in the United States, we're just making assumptions. We're making assumptions about whether or not they want to assimilate. We're making assumptions about assimilation. We're making assumptions about their backgrounds and education, what they bring, all of this. We just don't know. And so with these welcome circles, that's kind of the principle that we're shouting. We're creating systems, we're creating structures, we're creating goals, we're creating plans for outcomes. But again, it's up to the family. Maybe the family doesn't want any of our structures. Maybe we create this whole beautiful spreadsheet Excel. That's me. My Excel sheet is wild and we have a million Google Drive folders ready to go. And they come, they're like, we're good. We don't really need your help. Great. I'm so glad. And I created this whole Excel plan and it's not necessary. Or maybe the other way around. Maybe they were asking for a lot of help, but maybe we're able to step in those ways. We're just going to ask ourselves every day we're doing this work. Why are we doing it? How does it serve us personally? What is our emotional and psychological connection to this? And how does it feel today? How does it feel today? I think that's pretty critical here. And then I just have a list of a million resources for you all. If you want to deep dive into trauma-informed practice work, if you want to deep dive into mindfulness, if you want to deep dive into communication and silence, more information about aid or trauma-informed care, I will send all of these out and you can dive into them and do lots of reading. And I am very, very, very happy to talk to you all about all of this in greater detail. But that is the gist. Our whole goal here is to honor autonomy, demonstrate respect, understand how our language impacts relationships, practice humility and teamwork, and learn from reflection. And I want you to know how important your role in this is. I want you to know that the way that we work with families is the most important thing in successful outcomes. I've worked with a lot of families and I've seen the power of a volunteer changing a life, right? And I've seen what happens when people do not have access to services and they're not able to get support like this. And I've also seen what happens when we have these wonderful systems in place and structures in place. So I'm just so grateful that you're all interested in doing this and stepping up and coming to learn more about what it looks like to practice a trauma-informed approach to working with communities.